Omolewa is the land of balance, yet it thrives on boundaries. Each boundary is a rule laid by the gods. Every rule is a thread in the fabric of harmony. Without these threads, what do we have? Chaos. The Forbidden Grove is not just a boundary, it is a test. The gods have placed their trust in us, believing we can uphold respect for what is theirs. But trust can be fragile. A single act of greed can shatter it. Many generations ago, there was a man named Akanbi. He was a hunter, proud and skilled. His name was spoken with respect, but in his heart, he sought more. He had heard whispers of the grove, the fruit of the tree of Onye, and the power it promised. Why should the gods keep such gifts hidden? He thought. Why should mortals be denied what their hands can reach? Akanbi's curiosity turned to obsession. The more he heard the warnings, the more he convinced himself they were tales meant to instill fear. A tree cannot curse, he said to himself. The gods will not punish one who only seeks to grow stronger. One night, when the moon hid behind thick clouds, Akanbi entered the grove. The silence was unlike any he had known before. Not a leaf stirred, not a bird sang. But there it was, the tree of Onye, its fruit glowing faintly, as if calling to him. He reached for it, his hands trembling with anticipation. The moment his fingers brushed the fruit, the air changed. It grew heavy, suffocating. Akanbi hesitated, but his hunger, his pride, pushed him forward. With one bite, he sealed his fate. The taste was sweet, sweeter than anything he had ever known. But as the sweetness faded, so did his strength. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. The forest seemed to awaken. Shadows moved where there had been none. Akanbi realized then that the gods were watching. The man returned to the village, but he was no longer the same. His hair had turned gray overnight. His body, once strong, was frail. He could not speak of what he had done, for his voice was gone. It was said the gods had stripped him of his vitality, not just for his act, but to serve as a warning for all who came after him. This is why the Forbidden Grove remains untouched. It is not fear that keeps us away. It is wisdom. We have learned through pain what it means to respect what is not ours. Do the gods still watch us as they watched Akanbi? Do they still test us? The gods always watch, every moment, every choice they see, and they wait. They wait to see if we have learned. The laws of Omolewa were not written in ink. They were etched into the lives of its people. Each law was a story, and each story a reminder. At the heart of these laws stood King Oba Adaroju. His voice carried the weight of the ancestors, and his words were not to be questioned. Yet, he ruled with fairness, balancing strength with understanding. On market days, the people would gather in the square, exchanging goods and stories. The elders sat in a semicircle, their eyes ever watchful. It was here, under the shade of the great Iroko tree, that disputes were resolved, advice was given, and lessons were shared, but not everyone agreed with the elders. There were whispers, murmurs of discontent. Some of the younger generation felt the rules were too rigid, the stories too outdated. Why should we fear what we have not seen? They would ask. Why should we honor laws that limit our potential? Among them was Adebola, a young farmer with calloused hands and sharp eyes. He had earned respect for his hard work, but his ambition was a flame that burned too brightly. Why do we cling to the old ways? Adebola would often say. The land is ours to shape. The gods have blessed us, yes, but must we always kneel to them? His words made many uneasy, but Adebola was not one to be silenced. He had grown up under the shadow of his father, Chief Oladimeji, a man who was the embodiment of tradition. Oladimeji was a towering figure, his voice deep and commanding. He believed in the old ways, and he made sure his family followed them. You speak of shaping the land, Oladimeji said to Adebola one evening. But the land shapes us. Without the gods, we are nothing. Do not let your pride blind you. It is not pride, father, Adebola replied. It is vision. The world is changing. If we do not change with it, we will be left behind. Oladimeji's gaze hardened. Change is not always progress. The ancestors did not pass down their wisdom for it to be cast aside. Their arguments were frequent, and they left Adebola with a deep sense of frustration. He loved his father, but he felt caged by his expectations. The only person who seemed to understand him was Ifedayo, his betrothed. Ifedayo was the opposite of Adebola, calm, patient, and wise beyond her years. "Your dreams are not wrong," Ifedayo told him one evening as they sat by the river. "But dreams must be guided by humility. The gods have given us much. Shouldn't we honor them for it?" "And what if the gods are not what we think?" Adebola asked. "What if they do not care whether we honor them or not?" Ifedayo sighed. "That is the kind of thinking that leads to ruin. Look around you, Adebola. The trees, the rivers, the fields. Do you think they flourish because of chance? There is balance in all things, and we must not disrupt it." Her words stayed with Adebola, but they did not extinguish the fire within him. He yearned for something more, something greater, and it was this yearning that set the stage for what was to come. The Festival of the Ancestors was the most important event in Omolewa. It was a time of celebration and remembrance, a time to honor those who had come before and to seek their guidance for the future. The entire village gathered in the square, dressed in vibrant colors. Drums beat rhythmically, and dancers moved, in a way that seemed to bridge the earthly and the divine. The air was thick with the scent of roasted yams and spices. Children laughed as they chased each other, while the elders shared stories that had been told for generations. It was a time of joy, but this year there was an undercurrent of unease. The village seer, an old woman with eyes like molten gold, stood at the center of the square. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that silenced even the most restless. "Children, the gods have sent me a vision," she said, "a vision of what is to come." The crowd leaned in, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. "One among us will stray into the forbidden grove," she continued, "and their hunger will awaken the wrath of the gods." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Faces turned to one another, eyes wide with worry. "Who?" someone asked. "Who will it be?" The seer shook her head. "The gods did not reveal that to me, but know this: if the balance is broken, Omolewa will pay the price." Adebola stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw clenched. The seer's words gnawed at him, not with fear, but with a strange sense of challenge. Could it be him? Could the gods be daring him to test the limits of their power? As the festival continued, the villagers whispered among themselves, the joy of the evening dimmed by the shadow of the seer's prophecy. Adebola, however, was lost in thought. The fire in his heart burned brighter than ever. By the time the drums had quieted and the stars had taken their place in the sky, Adebola had made his decision. The gods' warnings, the laws of the elders, they were chains, and he was ready to break free. The argument had been fierce, voices carrying through the still night air like thunder before a storm. Adebola's father, Chief Oladimeji, stood, tall, his tone sharp with disappointment. "You think wisdom is found in defiance, but it is not. You challenge the ways of the ancestors as if they are chains, but they are shields that protect us." Adebola's fists clenched at his sides. "Protect us from what, father? The world is changing. Must we forever live in fear of what might happen if we step outside the lines drawn for us? You call it fear. I call it respect," Oladimeji shot back. "You are blinded by your arrogance, Adebola. If you continue on this path, it will be your undoing." Adebola glared at his father, his jaw tight with unspoken anger. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed into the night. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from frustration. The stars above glittered coldly, indifferent. To his turmoil, his feet carried him without thought, driven by a restless energy that refused to be calmed. He found himself on the outskirts of the village, where the towering trees of the forbidden grove loomed like silent sentinels. The air here was different, thick and heavy, as though it carried a weight too great to bear. They call this place forbidden, he thought bitterly. But why? What are they so afraid of? The wind whispered through the trees, and a faint glow caught his eye. It seemed to come from deeper within the grove, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Drawn by a mixture of curiosity and defiance, Adebola stepped forward. The leaves beneath his feet crunched softly, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. There it was, the tree of Onye. Its branches stretched wide, adorned with fruit, that shimmered like jewels under the pale light of the crescent moon. The sight was mesmerizing, and the air was filled with an intoxicating sweetness. For a moment, Adebola stood frozen, caught between awe and hesitation. He reached out, his hand trembling as it neared the nearest fruit. The whispers in the air seemed to grow louder, forming words he couldn't quite understand. A part of him screamed to turn back, but the flame of defiance burned brighter. "They say you hold power," he murmured. "Let me see it." His fingers closed around the fruit, and he pulled it from the branch. The glow seemed to intensify, and the grove shuddered as if in protest. Adebola hesitated only briefly before bringing the fruit to his lips and taking a bite. The sweetness was overwhelming, unlike anything he had ever tasted. It coursed through him, filling him with a warmth that spread to every corner of his being. He felt stronger, sharper, invincible. But then, the sweetness turned bitter, and the ground beneath him trembled. The trees seemed to sway, their shadows, twisting and stretching toward him. A low, guttural sound rumbled through the grove, neither wind nor animal. Adebola staggered back, the fruit falling from his hand. He looked around, his breath coming in short gasps. The once still forest was alive, and it was angry. Something moved at the edge of his vision, a shadow darker than the night itself. He turned, but there was nothing there. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and a cold dread settled in his chest. He was no longer alone. Forcing himself to move, Adebola stumbled out of the grove, his heart racing. The air seemed to press down on him as though the weight of the gods themselves had descended. He did not stop until he was well beyond the trees, where the familiar sight of the village lights greeted him. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a heavy presence that clung to him like a second skin. When he finally reached his hut, the night was still and silent once more. Yet Adebola could not shake the sense that he had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. The next morning, Adebola woke with a start. His body felt different, stronger, lighter. He looked at his hands, marveling at how steady they were. The frustration and doubt that had clouded his mind the night before seemed to have lifted, replaced by an unshakable confidence. As he stepped outside, the villagers greeted him with smiles and admiration. They commented on his energy, his sharp wit, his presence. For the first time, Adebola felt truly seen. He carried himself with a newfound pride, basking in the attention. But as the days passed, the whispers began. First, it was the fields. Crops that had been thriving suddenly began to wither, their leaves curling as though scorched by an unseen flame. Then the sacred river, the lifeblood of the village, began to run dry. The animals that once roamed the Kiu forests disappeared, leaving an unnatural silence in their wake. The villagers grew uneasy. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the forbidden grove. It was clear that something was wrong, though no one dared to say it aloud. Adebola tried to push the thoughts from his mind, but they crept in like shadows. He could not deny the unease that had settled over the village, nor the nagging guilt that gnawed at him. He thought of the grove, of the fruit, of the whispers in the wind. And then came the sickness. It began with a few villagers, their strength sapped as though something had drained the life from them. The elders gathered, their faces grim, their voices low. The signs were clear. Someone had violated the sacred laws. A council meeting was called, and all eyes turned to Adebola. Chief Oladimeji's voice was heavy with accusation as he addressed his son. "There is a curse upon our land, and it comes from the forbidden grove. What have you done, Adebola?" Adebola's jaw tightened. "I have done nothing," he said. his voice firm. "Why must you always look to me for blame?" "If you are innocent, then prove it," Oladimeji said. "Swear before the gods that you have not touched what is forbidden." For a moment, the room was silent. Adebola's heart pounded in his chest, but his pride held his tongue. To admit the truth would be to invite show. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness as Adebola and Ifedayo stood at the mouth of the Cave of Echoes. Its gaping entrance seemed alive, the walls shimmering faintly as though the cave itself breathed. Ancient carvings adorned the rock, their meanings lost to time but their weight unmistakable. "Ifedayo, you should not have followed me here," Adebola said, his voice low. The guilt in his tone betrayed the arrogance he once wore like armor. "This is my burden." "You bear this burden for all of us," Ifedayo replied, stepping forward. Her calm resolve was unshaken. "And I will not let you walk this path alone. Let us face it together." With a reluctant nod, Adebola took her hand, and they crossed the threshold. The air within was colder, heavy with whispers that seemed to echo from every corner. Their footsteps reverberated, the sound stretching unnaturally in the vast, shadowy expanse. Deeper into the cave, the faint glow of a golden orb began to light their path. It rested on a pedestal of stone, pulsating like a heartbeat. The artifact seemed alive, its light illuminating carvings on the walls that depicted the balance between mortals and the gods, a harmony now broken. "It is beautiful," Ifedayo said, her voice filled with awe. "But it is also heavy with sorrow. The gods placed this here as a reminder, and we failed them." Adebola reached for the orb, but a gust of wind erupted, forcing them back. The light grew blinding as a figure materialized, a towering form of light and shadow, its presence commanding. It was the spirit of Onye, guardian of the grove, Aubai. "Dare enter this sacred place?" the spirit boomed, its voice reverberating through the cave. "You who defied the laws of the gods and brought ruin to your people?" Adebola fell to his knees. "I did not come to escape punishment. I came to make it right." The spirit loomed closer, its form shifting and twisting like smoke caught in a storm. "The balance has been broken. To restore it, a life must be offered. Only through sacrifice can harmony be restored." Adebola's heart sank, but he forced himself to stand. "Take me," he said, his voice steady. "Let my life be the price for my folly." "No." Ifedayo stepped in front of him, her arms outstretched. "He is guilty, yes, but his heart has changed. Let me bear this punishment in his place." Her words struck Adebola like a blow. "Ifedayo, no, I caused this. I cannot let you pay for my mistakes." The spirit's gaze shifted between them, its light dimming as though it were pondering their pleas. "Such selflessness is rare," it finally said, "but the gods demand justice, not mercy. Speak your final words, for one of you must fall." Ifedayo turned to Adebola, her eyes filled with both sadness and strength. "Do not let pride blind you again. If you survive this, make it count. Teach others to respect what we have been given." Adebola's throat tightened. "Ifedayo, I will not let you do this. The gods will hear my plea." He stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. "Great Spirit, I beg you, grant us a chance to mend what we have broken. I was arrogant, blind to the wisdom of those who came before me. Let me live, not for myself, but to serve my people and honor the gods." The cave trembled as the spirit's light flared. "Your heart speaks the truth, but words are not enough." The light dimmed, and the gods' voices filled the cave, low and resonant, speaking as one. "Adebola, you have defied us and endangered your people. Yet your remorse is genuine, and your transformation is evident. We will spare your life, but you shall carry the weight of your actions. You will live as a servant to your kingdom, stripped of your strength and pride." Adebola bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, gods. I will not fail you again." The spirit extended its hand, and the glowing orb returned to the pedestal. The balance had been restored. "Go," the spirit commanded. "Return to the grove. Restore what was stolen." Adebola and Ifedayo emerged from the cave, their steps heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. When they reached the grove, Adebola held the final piece of the forbidden fruit in his hands. The tree of Onye seemed to reach for it, its branches swaying as though alive. As he placed the fruit at the base of the tree, the grove seemed to exhale. The withered leaves turned green, the air grew sweet, and the forest awakened with life, once more. Back in the village, the changes were immediate. The rivers flowed, the crops flourished, and the sickness faded. The people rejoiced, but Adebola stayed apart, watching from the shadows. When they saw him, they did not cheer. They bowed their heads in quiet respect. He had been their undoing, but now he was their redemption. Years later, children would gather around Adebola as he told them the story of the tree of Onye. He spoke not as a hero, but as a man who had learned the price of hubris and the value of humility. His voice carried the weight of his journey, a lesson etched into the hearts of all who listened. The first drops of rain fell softly, soaking into the cracked, thirsty soil of Omolewa. The villagers stared in wonder as the once dry riverbeds began to fill, the water rushing forward with the energy of life returning to the land. Women knelt by the rivers, cupping the water in their hands, tears mingling with their laughter. "Do you see it?" an elder exclaimed. "The gods have forgiven us." The younger villagers danced barefoot in the rain, their joy echoing through the hills. Children splashed in the growing streams, their laughter ringing as a testament to the relief that swept through the kingdom. This was no ordinary rainfall. It was the gods' blessing, a sign that balance had been restored. In the days that followed, the fields, once brown and brittle, sprang back to life. Green shoots emerged from the earth, stretching toward the heavens. Farmers worked tirelessly, their faces lit with hope as golden grains filled their granaries once more. The aroma of fresh yams and maize filled the air, a promise of abundance after months of despair. In the village square, neighbors exchanged baskets of food and warm smiles, united by a shared gratitude. There was a renewed faith in the old ways, an understanding that the laws of the gods were not burdens, but gifts. Omolewa thrived again, not just in harvest, but in spirit. Amid the celebrations, Adebola was absent. He had retreated to the edge of the village, where he worked silently to mend the broken walls of his family's home. His once proud shoulders were bent with humility, his hands roughened by labor. Each stone he placed was not just for the house, it was for the trust he had shattered, the relationships he was determined to rebuild. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He worked from dawn to dusk, tending to the fields, helping neighbors repair their tools, and carrying water for the elders. When others called out to him in greeting, he simply nodded, his eyes lowered. It was not shame that kept him quiet. It was the weight of his lessons. Ifedayo, too, became a beacon of hope and wisdom. Her strength during the trials had not gone unnoticed. Women from the village sought her counsel, and young girls gathered around her, eager to learn from her courage. "When we are tested," Ifedayo told them one evening, "it is not just our strength that matters. It is our heart. The gods see not only what we do, but why we do it. Let your actions honor them." The Council of Elders soon recognized Ifedayo's wisdom. Chief Oladimeji himself called for her to join their meetings, a rare honor for someone so young. Her voice carried weight, and her words were guided by the lessons she had learned. When disputes arose, she reminded the villagers of the harmony they had fought to restore. As years passed, Adebola's transformation was complete. The once reckless young man became a quiet mentor, his wisdom shaped by his mistakes. He gathered the village children under the great Iroko tree and spoke to them of the tree of Onye. "Do you know why the gods placed the tree in the grove?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. The children shook their heads, their eyes wide with curiosity. "To remind us," he continued, "that not everything that shines is meant for us. The gods are generous, but they are also wise. They ask us to respect the balance they have created, for when we break it, we all suffer." The children listened intently, their small faces lit by the flickering firelight. Adebola told them the story of his own folly, sparing no detail of his arrogance and the pain it had caused. But he also spoke of redemption, of the second chance he had been given. "Do not fear the gods," he said, "but honor them. In doing so, you honor yourselves and all who came before you." The story of the tree of Oniwa became a lesson, passed from generation to generation, a cautionary tale and a symbol of the kingdom's resilience. The villagers came to see Adebola not as the man who had once defied the gods, but as the man who had learned to walk in their light. The gods' warning lingered, a reminder carved into the hearts of the people. Hubris, unchecked, could destroy even the most blessed lands, yet humility and sacrifice could heal even the deepest wounds. The people of Omolewa carried these lessons forward, their lives woven into the fabric of tradition and harmony. Omolewa's legacy endured, not just in its fields and rivers but in its stories. It stood as a testament to the power of humility, the value of tradition, and the strength found in unity. Balance had been restored, and with it came peace. The elders gathered beneath the great Iroko tree, their faces grave, their voices low. Each wrinkle on their weathered faces seemed to hold the weight of countless seasons, countless stories. These were the guardians of Omolewa's traditions, the keepers of ancient laws that had guided the kingdom since the first seed was planted in the fertile soil. "Omolewa thrives," one elder began, his voice firm yet sorrowful, "because we respect the boundaries the gods have set. The tree of Oniwa stands as both a blessing and a test. It reminds us that not all gifts are meant to be taken." A younger villager, bolder than the others, raised his voice. "But how long must we cling to these old ways? The world outside is changing. Perhaps we fear what we do not understand." The elder's gaze hardened. "It is not fear, young one. It is wisdom. The laws are not chains. They are shields. Without them, the balance crumbles." As the council's voices rose and fell like the tide, Adebola stood at the edge of the gathering, his fists clenched. Each word felt like a stone thrown at his dreams, his ambitions. He had heard enough tales, enough warnings. To him, they were shackles disguised as wisdom, a refusal to embrace the possibilities of change. Later that evening, Adebola confronted his father, Chief Oladimeji, in their family's compound. The elder chief sat by the fire, the glow casting long shadows across his stern features. "Father, why must we bow to these traditions? Why must we live in fear of a tree?" Adebola's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet night. "Chief." Oladimeji did not look up immediately. When he spoke, his tone was measured, heavy with the authority of years. "It is not the tree we fear, Adebola. It is the gods. They do not take defiance lightly." "And what if they are not watching?" Adebola pressed. "What if they have abandoned us? Why should we deny ourselves because of stories told by the elders?" The chief's gaze met his son's, piercing and unyielding. "You speak as though you are greater than the gods. That pride will lead to your fall, Adebola." "It is not pride," Adebola snapped, his voice rising. "It is vision. Omolewa could be so much more if we let go of these chains." Oladimeji's voice turned cold. "What you call chains, I call wisdom. The ancestors passed down these laws for a reason. Do not let your ambition blind you, my son." Adebola stormed away, his heart pounding. His father's words only deepened the chasm between them. He felt suffocated by the weight of his lineage, by the expectations of a community that seemed content to live in the shadow of the past. In the days that followed, whispers began to spread through the village. The sacred river had grown shallow, its once strong current now a sluggish trickle. Fields of yams wilted under the sun, and the forests grew unnervingly quiet. The villagers cast wary glances toward the forbidden grove, their fear simmering beneath the surface. One evening, as the village gathered in the square, the elders spoke of these omens. "The gods are watching," one declared. "Someone among us has disturbed the balance." All eyes turned to Adebola. He stood tall, his face a mask of defiance. "You have no proof," he said, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. "Do not place blame where there is none." Ifedayo, his betrothed, stepped forward, her eyes pleading. Adebola, if you know something, anything, speak now. The god's anger grows stronger with each day. Adebola looked at her, his heart aching at the pain in her voice. But his pride held him silent. To confess would mean shame, exile, perhaps even death. He turned away, leaving the weight of his guilt unspoken. That night, as sleep eluded him, Adebola was visited by vivid dreams. The spirit of Onye appeared, a figure of light and shadow, its voice echoing like a distant storm. You have broken the sacred law, the spirit intoned. Your defiance has cursed your people. The river dries, the crops fail, and the sickness spreads because of your arrogance. Adebola fell to his knees in the dream, his voice trembling. I did not mean to bring harm. I only sought to prove myself. Pride blinds you, the spirit replied, but there is still a chance for redemption. Journey to the Cave of Echoes. There you will find the artifact stolen from the gods. Return it, and the balance may yet be restored. The vision faded, but the weight of the spirit's words lingered. When morning came, Adebola shared his dream with Ifedayo. She listened intently, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. If this is the god's will, then you must go, she said, and I will go with you. No, Adebola said firmly, this is my burden. If you carry it alone, you will fall, she replied. The gods may have sent you this task, but they also gave you people who love you. Let me help. Together, they set out toward the cave, the journey fraught with trials that mirrored Adebola's flaws. At the river's edge, they encountered a spirit who demanded humility. Adebola struggled, his pride resisting the lesson, but Ifedayo's calm guidance helped him see the path forward. In the Golden Valley, temptation loomed in the form of treasures that promised wealth and power. Adebola faltered, his ambition nearly consuming him, but Ifedayo's unwavering resolve reminded him of the greater purpose. At last, they reached the Cave of Echoes, where Adebola faced haunting visions of his past mistakes. Each image was a reminder of the pain his pride had caused. When the trial ended, he stood before the artifact, his heart heavy with the weight of his journey. He lifted the artifact, his voice steady as he spoke. I was wrong to defy the gods. I see now that strength is not in taking what is forbidden, but in honoring what is given. The gods watched, their judgment clear in the restoration of Omolewa's harmony. Rivers flowed once more, crops flourished, and the villagers rejoiced. Yet Adebola did not seek their praise. Instead, he worked quietly to rebuild what he had broken, his humility a testament to the lessons he had learned. The story of the Tree of Onye became a legend, a cautionary tale shared around fires and passed down through generations. It was a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the power of redemption. Adebola, once blinded by pride, became a symbol of humility and resilience, his journey a beacon for those who followed.